Hello students, Eric Magidson here. So this is going to be sort of a unique lecture for the Module 3 outcomes. These are the Module 3 outcomes, and I'm going to go ahead and run through these with just a blank spreadsheet so that you could create the same data that I'm going to use. All right. So we're gonna bypass a couple of these, and as I complete them, I'll just go ahead and highlight them up. So the first one is create a series of month names. Okay, I'm going to cover that first. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. And I'm going to go ahead and make my spreadsheet even bigger just so we can get an idea. Now, I've already gone through this when we did the budget, but just real quick, month names. If we wanted to, we could type in January. Now, January. And now what you'll notice is in some cases, we need to have a sequence. We need to have multiple cell values to continue along the sequence. I'll show that to you in a minute. But in this case, Excel is intelligent. And if we use the fill handle right down here with the word January and fill it over to the right, it assumes that we want the next month. Now, we can also do this short. So if I just want to put in Jan as in for January, I'm going to get Feb, Mar, you get the idea, okay? Now, we can also do this for Monday, for example. So Mon, and I'm just filling over, or I can do Monday. Now, let's say I didn't want to start on Monday. Let's say that my spreadsheet needed to start on Saturday. Well, I could just start Saturday, and of course, it fills in the sequence from there. So there's another example. Remember that we can also do like team 1. For example, I've got team 1, and of course I need a sequence now. So I'm going to need to type in team 2. And then notice it's going to give me 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Same thing for sequence of numbers too. So if you notice, if I just have one number and I fill it, it doesn't fill it, it actually copies it, because it doesn't have a sequence. So if I tab over here, and let's say we want to do odd numbers. Now notice I've got to highlight both parts of my sequence, the 1 and 3, and I can left click, drag with that fill button, and get the sequence I'm looking for. So here's the sequence 2 to 11, and then 20, and then it fills the sequence. So there is create a series of month names as well as additional information that you need. Now, let's just go ahead and we'll highlight all this and delete it. I will right click on the column and insert. Let's say that this is going to be sales. Here's Bill, here's Sam, here's Samantha, Joan, Jill, Becky, Mark, I don't know, and Jesse. Okay, so there's that. Now, let's say we had just a little bit of data that we were filling in here. Okay, like maybe Bill sold 12 units, 15 in this month, 17, 10, and in June 6, whatever the case may be. So let me go ahead and make this a little smaller so we can see all of our data. Now, if you notice, what we might want to do here is somehow modify our column headings so that it doesn't take up as much white space. So what I'm doing right now, by the way, is the rotate text in a cell. So a couple ways to do this. Okay, first of all, I can select this here, and if you notice, I have some options to rotate text here. So notice I can do a counterclockwise, I can do clockwise. That's going to rotate. That's not going to save me as much space. Notice vertical though, vertical up and down, text up. So if you notice, vertical has the text one above the other. Here, vertical up. So these are some great examples of text. Now, of rotation of content in a cell. Now by doing this, now I can go ahead and make that smaller and have my chart be much more compact, easier to read without all the white space. Okay, so copy, paste, insert, delete cells. Well, clearly these are some basics. You probably already have this, so I'll run through this real quick. if I want to copy these two cells, I just highlight these two cells, right click, I can choose copy from my list, and then of course I need to have two equal cells, and I can paste. Now there's many different ways of pasting. There's pasting with formatting. I can right click, I can paste just the values. Notice how the formatting now in this preview is different. I can do formulas, I can transpose the data, formatting, which is just the formatting, or paste a link to the data, which means by pasting link to the data, okay, if I come over here, you know, and change that to Bill, you'll notice that this changes to Bill. So that's a link to the data. So the data doesn't actually exist here twice. Notice equals B1, it equals the content in B1. So when I changed B1, it changed the data, whether it be text or in this case, a value, okay? So format numbers using format symbols. Well, let's just go ahead and put in some more data here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to right click and delete these cells, or delete these columns, excuse me. And then we have some data here. Well, let's say that this data represented values, for example, okay? Let me just quickly do something here. I'm going to pause. And we then wanted to format format numbers using format symbols. So in this case, what I might want to do is come up here and format this with some sort of formatting. Now, as I've addressed, I like the idea of formatting. I don't understand why it's doing that. That's kind of funky. So must have been a bug from the linking. When I got rid of the link, it kept that marquee box that we're used to. So let me go ahead, and what I did is I just deleted that column, added some data back. Now if you notice here, one of the nice things about the accounting format is it keeps the dollar away from the data. So if I have a bunch of data and a bunch of dollar signs, it can become rather difficult to read, okay? So let me just go ahead and widen these just a little bit here so we can see the dollar go away. There we are. Whereas with the currency, if we look at these, now I'm not going to demonstrate all of these, but with the currency, you can see that it quickly becomes difficult to read. This could be mistaken as a 5, okay? So there's some formats here. We have tons of different formats. We can format as date, percentages. Remember, with percentages, we always want to do two places behind the decimal because it's normally 4.99%. We don't want that rounding to 5. We can do fractions, we have text, and we have many other amazing formats, including some great custom formats here, or special formats. Notice we have a format for zip code. We have a format for zip code plus the 4. We have a format for phone number here. This wouldn't format as a phone number, of course. And then social security number, format it as well. So keep those in mind. Definitely get in practice with those formats, okay? So those are the formatting symbols. Now, the last thing that I want to mention on formatting symbols is if we end up having a bunch of data, and let me go ahead and just make this just a touch smaller. I'll do the equals rand between, okay? And I'm going to do between 10 and 20 so that I can get some data here. Notice my formula is rand between. I'm going to fill that over and fill this down. Now I've done this in a lecture as well, because here, if I don't then right click and copy this, and now I'm actually going to paste it back, but I'm going to paste just the values. And the reason being, if you notice, it gets rid of the rand between function. That way, every time I make a change, it doesn't, it won't make the change into the formula. I don't know why that is happening. That is really weird. I've pasted the data, and it just continues to give me that silly marquee even after I do a backspace or you know, I come in here, enter text. Notice the marquee should now disappear. So we'll just go ahead and call that a bug in Microsoft and move on. So something's definitely going on here. I'm going to go ahead and use the accounting function. I'm going to use it for the whole thing. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing and utilize the accounting. Now, this, of course, becomes rather busy, as you can see here, okay? Let me go ahead and pause and see if I can get rid of that silly marquee. All right, well, that's kind of weird. Things happen. So anyway, as you can see here, the data becomes pretty busy. Now, normally, we might then total this up. So let me go ahead and do some totals here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and utilize a manual formula that I create. So there's the manual formula. I'll go ahead and fill this over. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because what I want to show you is that formatting, most of the time, we want to format a little bit different. I'm going to make this cell styles a total cell style here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and format all of this content. Notice I'm going to keep the formatting with the $ above there. Okay. And I'm going to just format this as a number. Okay. And that way, if you notice, I keep the $, I can see what format or what style I'm in. You know, if I come up here, you know, come to more number formats, look at currency. Well, you know, I don't want that symbol. You know, maybe, I don't know, I want Georgian currency. So there's the Georgian, which happens to be at the right. But you get the idea that I can then easily view the data without all the complexity of my formatting. Okay? So there's that. Let's look at entering and formatting the system date for a minute. So the easiest way to do the system date is actually a keyboard shortcut. So I've come down here, and what I'm going to do is I just hit the control key while I hit the semicolon, and it will put in the date. Okay. If I want the time, for example, I can go control shift semicolon and get the current time. So what we're looking at here are the system times. That's what's important here, is the system time. Okay. So that's entering the system date, control semicolon, entering system time is shift, control, and semicolon. And then, of course, if we wanted to, we can certainly come up here to the date. We can go to more date formats, and I've got a bunch of different formats that I can use for the date. So here's, you know, the full date, the standard date we're used to, you know, one date sort of to start looking at, okay, is like this date here, you know, the 14th March 12th. So if we notice there, let me go ahead and forward that, the 21st of August 17. That's a pretty standard programming date. All right. So we're going to move on to another cell. We'll call this our basics 1 sheet here. Okay. And I'm going to call this my absolute sheet. Now what I'm going to do for us, I'm actually going to go back here. Let me quickly format this. And I'll come back up to currency. I'm going to go to more number formats. I'm going to just go back here and grab our standard $ format. There we go. Now, not only can I copy just segments of a sheet, but I can copy complete data. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to move it over to the absolute because right click and paste. It's going to say, you want all those sheets? Yes, I do. And I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger so I can show you what an absolute or mixed cell reference in a formula is. Okay. So an absolute formula, if you notice, if I come in here and I say percentage increase, for example, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and do an Alt Enter. Watch why I did that. Hit the enter. Now I get a percentage increase vertically. Okay, so I'm going to say 0.05. That is not going to be a currency. I'm going to format that as a percentage, and I'll increase it just so we can see that it's exactly 5%. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to actually take this value here, the value in this cell, and the 5%, and I'm going to come down here and say next year estimate. Okay, boy, I just cannot type today. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this data again, right click and copy. And I'm going to paste it down to the estimate. And what I want to do down here is I want to actually increase this by 5%. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say equals, and remember with 5%, what we actually have to do is this plus this again times, and then our 5%. So we have the 12 plus 5% of 12, and I'll hit the enter key. Now by doing this, if you notice, it comes to $12.60 or $12.60 or 12 units, whatever it ends up being. Okay. Now, if I then come here and fill down, watch what happens. Notice this stays at 19. It didn't increase by 5%. Well, if I notice up here and I double click on this, I'll see that it's using the cell below it. Now, this is what we expect to happen because Microsoft is programmed to iterate, right? To iterate data. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and instead of doing that, what we need to do is somehow tell it to always use this cell here. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this data. I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to change one thing. And if you notice here, it is using I2. I got to somehow tell it to always use I2. And the way I do that is to highlight this and hit the F4 key. F4, okay, above the keyboard. And if you notice, it puts an absolute sign in front of the I and an absolute sign in front of the 2. Now, as I do that, and I come in here and fill down, it leaves the I2. Let's double click on here. Notice now it's iterating the B3 from B2 to B3, but it's keeping the I2. So at this point, I can go ahead and fill down. I don't need to fill through my totals. I can fill over. And I have a 5% increase on all of these values. So if I come down here, notice it keeps the I2. So that's how we get an absolute cell reference with I2. Okay, so that's enough for this video. I'll cover more in the next. Take care.